Good morning and welcome to Sovereign Grace Community Church of the Yampa Valley and to our Rocky Mountain Reformed daily Bible teaching. Well, not daily Bible teaching, but Bible teaching. I just unfortunately do not have the time to do this every single day, but this morning is February 21st, 2022. Today is President's Day here in the United States, and this is a day where we remember all of our presidents, but especially two of our presidents, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, who both had birthdays in the month of February. When I was a kid, we actually celebrated both of those birthdays, but they combined that into President's Day. And so today is a day that we remember the men who have served in that office. And it's kind of funny because we're going to jump back into, not funny, but a coincidence, I guess. We're going to jump back into our study of First Timothy, actually the pastoral epistles. And we find ourselves in First Timothy chapter 1. And we were here actually before Christmas, quite a bit before Christmas, and had gotten away from it, did a lot of different things. There was a period of time I didn't do any. I had COVID over Christmas, and that was a great Christmas present. And anyhow, just kind of got away from it. But we are going to jump back into that series. You'll remember the name of that series was The Solution to the Crisis in the Church. And we talked about how the evangelical church is really at a moment of crisis, especially here in the United States, in which we find ourselves really not being able to define anymore what the term evangelical means, what the term Christian means. And I believe that one of the primary reasons for this, that the church finds itself in the predicament that it finds itself in, is because of a lack of biblical leadership in so many churches. I have been a pastor now for almost 20 years, and I can say that I have only been involved in one church where I believe that they really strive, and it's the current church that I'm in, to meet that biblical model of leadership and to meet those qualifications. We're not always perfect, certainly, but I think that at Sovereign Grace, we really try to achieve that. So what we're going to do, first thing we're going to do is we're going to read this passage here in First Timothy. And so if you have your Bibles and you want to open your Bibles, open to First Timothy chapter 3, and we will read verses 1 through 3. And it says this, Paul says in verse 1, "It is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? And not a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil." Well, the ministry, pastoral ministry really of any kind in a church, is a work. But unlike any other job that you might have, the role of pastor elder, and that's really what Paul is talking about here in verses 1 through 7, is a divine appointment. The office of pastor elder is not a human invention. The office of overseer in a Christian context is a work that requires diligence, it requires application, it requires discipline. The pastor, overseer, elder should always look more to the importance of his work. And by that, I mean the process of his work than to any earthly accolades that you may or may not receive. The office of pastor elder is a good work. It is an immeasurable office of great importance. There is nothing more vital, more important in the world than the eternal destiny of people's souls. And that's what the work of the pastor is all about. And so because of this, first and foremost, the man that is the pastor elder must have a desire to serve in that capacity. The man who is going to serve in this office must be qualified too. And Paul, here in these verses, very specifically lays out for us what those qualifications are. First and foremost, the office of pastor elder is for men only. If you are going to a church where you have a woman pastor, you do not have a pastor. That is not that they are outside of the biblical qualifications for pastors. There is no such thing as a female pastor. Now, I've said it many times, and I apologize this morning. My allergies are kind of bothering me, oddly enough. It's kind of cold outside today. But I've said this many times. Women have an extremely important role to play in the church, and especially in the family. I think of my own upbringing. My mother had more influence on me than my dad. Not that my dad did not have a great influence on me. He did, but my dad was working. My dad was outside of the home a lot of the time. I was more day-to-day involved with my mom than I was with my dad. And I would say that was probably the experience of most of us. So that is the very first thing. And we'll get to why we say that here in a little bit. But the first one that he says there in verse 2 is an overseer then must be above reproach. The pastor elder must be blameless. He must not have any scandal in his life. Now, this does not mean that a man has to have lived a life that is perfect, that is without sin, because that is impossible. But there must be no stain of scandal in his life. The second thing that they list there, and this is why we say that the office of pastor is for men only, he must be the husband of one wife. He is to be a one-woman man. It does not say the wife of one husband, but the husband of one wife. So the pastor is a man. He is to be a one-woman man. He is to be a faithful man to his wife. He is not to be a flirt. He's not to be a man who is involved with other women other than his wife. This does not mean, I believe, that a man cannot be divorced. Many believe that a pastor should not be a man who has ever been divorced. If he is a man who has been divorced, especially before he was saved, I think he could still serve as a pastor elder. It really has to do with his sexual behavior in the marriage. He is to be a one-woman man. He is to be faithful to his wife. And let me say this. If a pastor has an extramarital affair, which it seems like every now and then we hear of this, I believe that is a disqualifying sin. That does not mean that man cannot be forgiven for that sin if he repents. He absolutely will be forgiven. The Bible promises that. But what that means is that his days of serving as a pastor, elder, overseer, and yes, even deacon, those days are over. There are other ways that he can serve the church, but just not in that capacity. Third one is he must be temperate, prudent, respectable. He must not put himself in situations where he's going to be tempted. He must be self-controlled, moderate in all of his behavior. He must not be a comedian in the pulpit. There is so much of that today, so much entertainment that goes on. He's not to be light and fluffy, as so many are in the pulpit today. He's not to be vain. I believe we have a lot of men in the pulpit today that are very egotistical and very vain. He is also to be hospitable, it says. That means he must be a man who welcomes strangers. It does not mean that he has to have an endless line of dinner parties in his home. But he must be accessible and approachable. I believe that's really what Paul is getting at here. He must be able to teach. Now we're going to learn, this is the one qualification that distinguishes a elder from a deacon. He must be able to teach. He must be willing to teach, willing to communicate his knowledge of God, the knowledge that God has given him to other people. He is not to be addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable. He must not be a drunk, plain and simple. He must not be a man that is known for drinking, who people know likes to imbibe. He must also not be quarrelsome. He must not be argumentative. Instead, he should be known for doing everything with mildness, love, and gentleness. Now, that does not mean that he does not stand on truth. He does, but not in a quarrelsome and argumentative manner. He's also to be free from the love of money, from the love of the wealth of the world, worldly success, material possessions. Those must not be what motivates the man of God. Matthew Henry says in his commentary that he is to be, quote, dead to the wealth of this world, end quote. And then it says this: he must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? He must manage his own family well. The families of pastors and elders should be examples of good to the other families in the church. His children must respect him. And the best way to keep people doing what they are supposed to be doing is by gaining their respect. He is not to be a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. The elder must not be a person who is a recent convert to Christianity. First of all, because he does not have the requisite knowledge to serve as in that capacity. And secondly, he will be much more susceptible to pride and arrogance if he is put into that position too soon. And then lastly, it says, and he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. He must have a good reputation with his neighbors and those who are outside of the family of God. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter, or rather he asks in 2 Corinthians chapter 2:16, and who is adequate for these things? And we have to ask the same thing. The office of pastor elder requires constant watchfulness. And if we're honest, if we're truly humble, we're going to understand that to some extent, none of us meet all of these qualifications, but we endeavor to follow these qualifications, and we endeavor to glorify and honor God through our service and through our daily behavior. We are to be thankful to God for appointing us to this office. I'm thankful that God has appointed me to this, and I trust each day that he will enable me to perform the tasks for his church and to bring him glory and honor. Well, I want to thank you for joining me this morning, and I pray that if you've been blessed by this, that you will share this far and wide with others as well on your various social media platforms. And I pray that you'll come back and join us again. Thank you very much.